and good. Start one more time. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone. Welcome to today's WEFE Nexus Policy Webinar 3, which is under the CGIAR Policy Innovations Program. This is one of the areas of work that does everything linked to water research and water policy. And my name is Claudia Ringler. I'm the co-lead of the WEFE Nexus policy work in CGIAR. And today we have an interesting set of presentations that we have combined under the title Looking Back and Looking Forward, Water, Energy, Food, Environment Analysis to Support Food Futures. As you probably know, CGIAR has for a very long time engaged in foresight analysis to identify priority investments and policy actions for water and food secure futures. One of the largest and most influential analysis centered on water has been the comprehensive assessment of water management in agriculture that in the early 2000s evaluated past and present water management practices to inform future investment and policy decisions for food security and also environmental sustainability. So this combination was very important. So we will hear today a looking backward, back into the early 2000s. So what has really happened following this really innovative foresight analysis. At the same time, of course, we use many other foresight tools. And one of them is the FABLE Calculator, which simulates future food and land use scenarios. And basically, the CGIAR Policy Innovations group and also others at CGIAR are working with the FABLE Calculator to support national policy processes. And today we hear a presentation that centers on Ethiopia, where this tool has been very actively used. Following those two presentations, we will hear from our discussant, Dr. Mohsin Hafiz, who is the lead of this WEFE Nexus policy area of work and also a strategic program director at the International Water Management Institute. And then, of course, we open to Q&A, and we hope that you will have lots of questions ready for the presenters. So with no further ado, rather than first looking backward, we are first looking forward. And we will now hear from Jonas Getane, who is a WEFE Nexus researcher with the Alliance of Biodiversity International in CIAT. And he will talk to us about looking forward, climate, agriculture, nutrition futures for Ethiopia using the FABLE Calculator. So Jonas, over to you. You're muted, potentially. Jonas, we cannot hear.
Sorry. Okay. Thank you, Claudia, for the introduction and the warm welcome. So my name is Jonas Getane. I'm a WEFE Nexus researcher at the Alliance of Biodiversity in CIAT. So today I will be just sharing some experiences on modeling nutrition, agriculture, and climate futures of Ethiopia that we have been doing over the past few years using the FABLE Calculator. So let's start up with just setting the frame about the agri-food systems of Ethiopia. That will be the core of my presentation. So agriculture is the main backbone of the Ethiopia's economy, accommodating about 70% of the country's labor force, 1/3 of the national GDP, and it's also supposed to achieve the food security targets of the country in the future. Whereas at the same time, despite it's very important and it's being an important sector in the economy, it will have so many environmental issues and challenges. It's the main source of deforestation, land degradation in the country. And it's also the source of high emissions, high GHG emission, especially from the livestock sector, as well as at the same time, it is a vulnerability. It's a highly vulnerable sector for climate change and extreme climate events. So there are some national goals set by the country that aims to increase the production and productivity of agriculture, as well as to reduce its impact on the environment, like to reduce impact on deforestation, to reduce GHG from this sector. And at the same time, the country has set some nutrition and food security goals, like end stunting in the future, increase the diversity of the food, and then increasing crop productivity in the future. So there are two basic irony things in here. One thing is to increase production and productivity in the agricultural sector. At the same time, to increase the negative impact of the agricultural sector on the environment. But the way of how to do this and the policy guidance to achieve these two things and to synchronize this, increasing production, achieving food security, as well as reducing environmental impacts, are a bit less integrated and less known in the context of Ethiopia. So there are some national efforts aiming to integrate the two things, to increase production as well as to achieve food security. Some of the national efforts were just the country has developed the national determined contribution aiming to reduce GHG emissions from mainly from the FABLE sector. The country has also committed the zero hunger goals of ending food insecurity by 2030, whereas also the country has some commitments to increase forest area, like that of the Bone Challenge. So these are some of the ongoing efforts that the country has made to achieve in the future. But there is some huge gap in here. These things in the FABLE sector, in the food, environment, and climate sector are less integrated in the policy. There is lack of integrated food system approach, and especially the food system is highly ignored both in the forest sector and in the climate sector. Then we are trying to show up an approach how to make the food system and the climate and the food systems an integrated one. So this is the focus of our attention and my presentation. So in here, we're trying to show an optimal policy pathway that would help the nation, the country, integrate the food and the climate, the environmental goals with little trade-offs and a high synergetic approach. So our approach is to estimate the amount of food that needs to be produced in the milestone years, and then measure the environmental impact of the food production system using the business as usual and the national commitment pathways. So they are our key indicators. Well, finding out these optimal pathways are the food security, like the amount of calorie intake per capita that needs to be acquired by the near future, and then the consecutive impact of this food on land use, on GHG, and also finally we have tried to identify key enablers that would help the country achieve these two things later on. So we have, when modeling these things, when making it a quantification, we have just developed two different outputs based on the business as usual pathway that we assume things will continue in the future as of the past decade, and we assume that there will not be any major change in the national policies and the national strategies. Whereas in the second pathway, we assume that the national policies like that of the NDC, the low emission development pathways, will be effectively implemented. And then we have tried to see the future of the country using these two different pathways. Our framework is called the FABLE approach, the food, agriculture, biodiversity, and the land use approach. This is FABLE is actually a tool that is developed by a network of scientists across the globe that could help the countries, nations align their national goals with international commitments. So we have to adapt this tool to contextualize the context of Ethiopia and then address the problem that I have already mentioned previously. So these are the sequence of steps that we pass through. The first is to develop the calculator itself using a FABLE data. The calculator, the model needs a series of time series data. So we have to use the FABLE state data as a baseline data to develop the calculator. Then we develop the data that needs to develop the scenarios. This is the business as usual in the national commitment pathways. Then we make a series of stakeholder consultation to refine the scenario data. Then we recalibrate the model, the calculator, based on the feedback from stakeholders. Then we make an impact of the scenarios, an impact of the food systems on land, environment, and GHG. And then we identify the best, the optimal pathway. Then again, we reevaluate the result using stakeholder validation approach. So we use the FABLE one because of its holistic approach, because of the possibility to align policies across different sectors, like policies across the environment, the food, and the land use, and its potential to address issues using a synergy and the trade-off approach, or high usability to address issues using a Nexus approach. So this is the approach that we use. This is a highlight of a case scenario inputs that drives our outputs across the business as usual and across the national commitment pathways. So we set up dietary, population, livestock productivity, crop productivity, afforestation, and related targets of the country by the near future for the business as usual and for the national commitment pathways. So once we set up this, then we recalibrate the calculator and then we run the output. So let's see what it looks like, the food, land, and GHG projections of the country based on our model results. So this is the projected food security and dietary target for the country. Just mainly, we use calorie intake per capita in the near future, and this dietary projection is guided by the food and dietary guideline of Ethiopia, and then we assume we project a steady increase in calorie intake per capita of the country after 23, and then we also expect a more plant-centered dietary, reduced in sugar consumption, and then an increase in protein diversification, and also an increase in intake of poultry and milk products in the future. So this is projected food results from the model. Then we assess the impact of this projected food impact on the land use and on the GHG across the business as usual pathway and across the national commitment pathway. So based on the business as usual pathway, then we could produce enough food, but it is at the expense of the major biodiversity and ecosystem assets of the country. So if we continue as of the previous past, cropland will be expanded highly and will exceed some 35 million hectares of land, which is now 20 million hectares, whereas the forest area will decline, because if we go as of the previous past, the existing deforestation rate will continue and no major change will be made to reduce this deforestation, and also afforestation rate will be reduced as of the historical past. So the impact, a combined impact of this is just a steady increase in cropland and then reduced in forest land. Whereas if we go to the national commitment pathways, we expect an effective implementation of ongoing afforestation efforts, reduced deforestation, and then crop productivity and increased livestock productivity could be used as a way to increase production volumes and a way to acquire the food security target. So without the national commitment pathway shows us, without compromising the environmental goals, there is a possibility to achieve the food target. We can say that Ethiopia could achieve its food security, simultaneously increasing its afforestation areas and preserving its natural assets. So this is a projected land use impact. Then what about projected greenhouse gas emission? At the same time, Ethiopia has committed to reduce greenhouse gas emission as a part of its international commitment. So if we go based on the business as usual pathway, then forest land will continue to increase, cropland will expand, then high amount of GHG emissions expected from the FABLE sector. Whereas if the country is able to achieve its national commitment target, there is a high potential to achieve its national commitment to reduce the GHG emission, and the FABLE sector could serve as a sequestration pool in the near future. So the carbon pool for the FABLE sector would be down to negative during the milestone years. So we can see that we have identified just a pathway that could help the nation to achieve its climate commitment targets without compromising the food security goals. So this is the thing that we have at the pathway that we have identified. Then these are the key enablers that could help the country to achieve the food target, simultaneously and achieve its climate commitment and environmental goals. The first one is increasing crop productivity, closing the existing yield gap, then accelerated afforestation. The country has committed to increase forest areas by more than 30 million by 2030, which is a good opportunity to acquire, to achieve the food security as well as the climate commitment targets. And the climate smart agriculture, that are considered as agroecological practices, are also key enablers that we have identified to help us to increase productivity without compromising the environmental goals. And also the livestock sector, there's a lot to increase productivity in the sector so as to reduce emission from the livestock sector. So doing this could help the country achieve its food security targets without compromising the environmental components. So key takeaways from this these are some of the key takeaways that we have identified from the modeling exercise. So it helps us to identify and integrated actions and then informs the policy to align the food systems with national and international climate commitments. It's also, especially the FABLE approach, is a good thing to link and policy and science, which are usually overlooked. And it also gives an opportunity of a collaborative model development. And it is also a stakeholder-driven approach. In the process of model development, stakeholders are always part of the modeling exercise. But the other drawbacks that we learn from the exercise is that it is a highly data-driven approach, and some of the data are a bit difficult to access in countries like Ethiopia, where data access is a bit difficult. And then I would like to thank you for attending my presentation, and thank you so much. And Claudia, over to you.
Yep, thanks so much. I think for this very carefully laid out description of Ethiopia's goals under business as usual, and also under climate goals, the consideration of climate goals, and really good to know that Ethiopia should be able to reduce its emissions while also improving food security. So I think that's really great how you laid that out, and also how you're collaborating with partners and other stakeholders in the country. Before we take any questions on this presentation, we'll go to the second presentation. And so if you maybe stop sharing, then we have our second set of presenters coming on. But for the audience, please feel free to start adding questions into the Q&A so that we can move over into the Q&A portion of this session after the second presentation and our discussant. Without further ado, we now first move to the second presentation, and that we are finally looking backward after we've looked forward and everything looks quite positive, and we can solve everything with models and talking to our stakeholders. And so now we have an exercise where similar work was done. I think it included more than 100 scientists across CGIAR and partners that try to also devise ways of addressing food insecurity and environmental challenges. And we will hear now about this historic exercise and looking back from Professor Petra Helligers. She's the chair of water resources management at Wageningen University, or Wageningen University Research, she can correct. And we also have Chris Sager, who I don't know if I pronounced the name correctly, and he is an assistant professor at the same university. So I'm handing over to you, and you can decide how you give your presentation. We very much look forward, because many of us were involved in this historic exercise. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Claudia, for introducing us. Yeah, thank you, Marcin and Claudia, for organizing this, and thank you all for attending. We very much look forward to presenting the work we did last year, and which is published this year in Agriculture Water Management. It was a joint effort of 3 people within the Water Resources Management Group, Chris Sager, Gerardo van Halsema, and myself, together with people from ERI, IMI, YASA, and IG. So not the credits just to us. Okay, next slide, please. And like you said, Claudia, it's also looking back, because like we see in Yoda's presentation, a lot of projections are made on projected change, And of course, it's also good to see whether these materialize, whether these assumptions you make underlying these expected changes hold. I think we're all aware that the challenge in agriculture water management is to grow indeed sufficient food for a growing, not only growing population, but also more wealthy population under climate change, while also meeting the other demands for water from households, industrial use, but also for environmental functions. Yes, please. Claudia referred already to it. In 2007, this report was released, and I think it was really a landmark. And it's really the main question which was posed: will there be enough water to grow enough food? And the answer was yes. But there was also an if. And I think this if was really taken for granted a little bit, because the if was based on the assumptions that there would be substantial land and water productivity gains. So last year we were wondering, to what extent have these land and water productivity gains been met to indeed have enough water to grow enough food? So we decided as a group, together with all the partners, to reassess or to reanalyze it. And in this report, various scenarios were there with various assumptions. So we really reassessed whether these gains were materialized. And Chris will now present the analysis which we did, and then later on I will reflect on the outcome. So I would like to give the floor to Chris now. I will get back to you.
Thanks, Petra. So yes, the comprehensive assessment had in a way a very, let's say, optimistic message that they concluded it is possible to double the agricultural production in 2050, because that was always the time horizon of the comprehensive assessment, to see how can we feed the world in a sustainable way in 2050. But to achieve this, let's say, ambition to double agricultural production with only minimal increases in land and water use, 3 strategies were basically proposed. And all 3 would be necessary to meet this goal. And the strategies were to optimize global trade. So basically meaning that you maximize your cereal production in regions with abundant water and a positive climate, and to export cereals around the world, to intensify rain-fed agriculture, and also to intensify irrigated agriculture. And the scenarios of the comprehensive assessment have made different choices for these 3 strategies. This picture is showing the different scenarios of the comprehensive assessment. And what you see, the top is basically showing the evapotranspiration changes, and the bottom part is showing the changes in area with different scenarios, with, let's say, the current situation, and then the scenarios for rain-fed, irrigation, and trade. And what you can clearly see is, if this is the current situation, the trade scenario is making, let's say, the biggest positive contribution. So the biggest gain to be made was in optimizing trade. And the second contributor was the rain-fed scenario, especially if you would follow the optimistic projections for rain-fed yields and areas. And the irrigation scenario would have a little bit of a smaller contribution, basically because the yields are already high in irrigation, relative high, and the irrigated area is already relative high. And what you then also see is that the scenarios had differences, not only in terms of the strategies, but also in terms of assumptions for yield gaps. And there was also, and that is very important to remind ourselves, the no improvement scenario, which is the brown gray color one at the bottom, when there are no improvements in productivity. And in our analysis, we were really interested to see, okay, if the current situation is the today 2000 base mark, where are we in the year 2020, which is giving us a nice insight how the world is doing in the light of these different scenarios. And what we did, so basically we reanalyzed the scenarios and we took as much information as we could from the comprehensive assessment. So we mimicked the regions that were assigned in the comprehensive assessment. We mimicked the scenarios and we looked at 3 main indicators. Trade, defined as the export minus import of a region, the area for both rain-fed and irrigated agriculture, and the yields of the main cereals being rice, wheat, and maize. We obtained data from the FOStat database, and we worked with 5-year averages to smoothen out fluctuations and extreme events in, let's say, the yearly trends. And yeah, as Petra mentioned, we published also our results. A few limitations that I already like to flag to communicate that clearly upfront. We were not able to separate the rain-fed and irrigated yields. We were not able to assess the intra-regional trade, so the trade within a region. And well, there is no reliable global data on crop evapotranspiration. So we really based ourselves on trade, area, and yields. How did the world develop from 2000 to 2020? Here are, let's say, the key trends. So we see population growth from 6.1 billion to 7.8 billion, an expansion in arable land for the temporary crops from 1360 to 1387. Rain-fed agriculture, we see a decline from 1080 to 1045. In irrigation, we see an increase globally from 280 million to 340 million hectares. We see increases in the maize, the rice, and the wheat yields. And we also see a clear increase in cereal production. So again, this is only the maize, rice, and wheat yields we looked at. From 1,776 million tons to 2,644 million tons. And we also note a clear increase in export. And now these trends are, well, they are very clear. And then the question is, to what extent did these different strategies played out in reducing our land area and in reducing our water use? And I will first discuss the trade strategy, because remember, that was the biggest contributor to the central goal of the comprehensive assessment, and then the rain-fed, and then the irrigation strategy. So this is this graph is basically showing the regions that also the comprehensive assessment adopted. So the OECD regions, that's basically Europe, North America, and Australia. You have Latin America, the Middle East, North Africa in light blue, and the Sub-Saharan Africa a little bit darker blue. And then we have Central Asia, CAS, East Asia, and South Asia. And what we show here in the pie charts is the arable land divided over rain-fed and irrigated in both 2000 and 2020. And you can already see changes in the different regions. And what this world map already shows is that optimization of global trade is not happening, because what we see here is that the regions that, according also to the comprehensive assessment, are favorable for cereal production and trade, and that are especially in the temperate zones with a good climate and high yields, fertile soils, so North America, Europe, and Central Asia, we see a strong decline in arable land of about 35 million hectares. And we see that regions in the south, and then especially Latin America, Sub-Saharan Africa, and East Asia to some extent, they are basically expanding their area to absorb, let's say, this decrease of favorable land. So that tells us that trade is not happening in the most optimized pattern. The next strategy we want to look at is the intensification of rain-fed agriculture. And the graphs here, what they show is on the left, the changes in rain-fed land, where the dark blue is showing the reported change. So that's basically what we obtained from FABLE, whereas in light blue is what was projected in the comprehensive assessment for the time horizon of 2050. And on the right, we show the increases in the yields for the 3 crops and their regions. And what is worrying in the in the rain-fed regions is that the key rain-fed regions in South Asia, East Asia, the OECD and Central Asia, we see that they are shrinking in their size already much faster than what was projected for the 2050 target. So we take out again important areas for rain-fed production. And what is also very worrying is that in sub-Saharan Africa, you see a massive expansion of rain-fed land, which is about 4 times higher already in 2020 than what was projected for 2050. But that the yields, and that is what you see on the right, that the yields also remain really low. So you have a rapid expansion and basically, you're losing a lot of nature land, but on a very small yields. So that is from, let's say, a production point of view, of course, not so optimal. So what we see is that the changes in rain-fed land use are much, much larger than what was optimally projected. And basically what we see here is that the strategy of intensifying rain-fed agriculture is not working out and is not succeeding as hoped for. And for irrigation expansion, so that's the third strategy, what we basically see is that the expansion has been much quicker and more extensive than what was projected in the optimal scenario. So again, this is then for irrigated land. The dark blue is the reported land use changes from 2000 to 2020. And we see that in Latin America, in the Middle East, in South Asia, and in East Asia, that is really outpacing the projections for 2050. So we also conclude that the main vehicle to increase production has really been this irrigation expansion and intensification. And what is also important to note is that we increasingly see irrigation for animal feed or biofuel, and that basically the economics are so interesting. And you can clearly see that, for instance, if you look at maize, that with the maize yields, that's the crop where the biggest improvements are made. And maize is mostly used for feed or for biofuel. So we're not talking about food crops anymore, but about feed and biofuel crops. You may begin to sense that we are sketching a bit of a worrisome picture here. And the first bullet I want to sink in, that is that we see that the world is steadily using more land and hence more water, because that's almost a linear relationship, to produce food, feed, and biofuel. And we are able to produce that, but we do that at the expense of nature. So we're losing land and we are losing water for nature. And we therefore conclude that the comprehensive assessment, it projected a possible path for development with major productivity gains. However, we don't see these materializing. And in terms of trade, what we see is that geopolitical considerations are limiting an optimal global trade pattern. And basically regions with abundant cereals, like for instance, Europe, North America, are limiting export surpluses for different reasons, which can be more economics, politics, or prioritizing national food security over global food security. And also in land productivity, what we see is that the increases in yields are really lagging behind the optimal projections. So optimally, it was about 60% increases in yield, and we find only a 30% increase. So we are not achieving these high increases in land productivity. And which is also why we find a massive expansion of arable land, because we cannot be more productive. And in terms of water productivity, also here, the hopes largely did not materialize because for 30 years, there has not been a breakthrough in photosynthesis efficiency. So the amount of water that a crop needs to grow has not become more efficient. So if at the crop level, these changes are not going to be made, then there are no breakthroughs in, let's say, reducing the water use. And what we also see is that at a closer inspection, when sometimes studies report high ranges in crop water productivity, these often relate to either very small-scale agronomic studies or they are large-scale remote sensing studies with big uncertainties and inaccuracies in the crop evapotranspiration and the crop water productivity. And then, but that is maybe already many of you have heard that, but often gains in irrigation efficiency are taken as a water saving, but these gains are not contributing to really, let's say, taking water away from agriculture and bringing it to nature or other sectors. But what they mostly do is that they are just being reused elsewhere for agriculture in a river basin, and with that contribute to a higher agricultural water consumption. We thought it's good to pinpoint some reflections, and I'm going to do one slide and then Petra takes over. So from this very big analysis of the comprehensive assessment, what we now can already see is that there are some underestimated factors in these scenarios that we are now much more aware of, and that should of course inform future scenarios. First one is there are a few factors which are much bigger than expected. One is the impact of biofuel, which on the right shows the energy derived from biofuel in 2000 was 7 times lower than it is already now. So this is taking out, of course, a lot of land out of the equation for food. The second one is population growth. The population has grown faster globally than anticipated, of course, also increasing the demands. And climate change has become a much bigger factor, which is really affecting farmers and yields around the world. On the other hand, what was smaller than expected is the scope to improve land and water productivity. So from our study, we really conclude there is very limited scope, although we have also held a debate in the water alternatives forum, where you also see more, let's say, optimistic experts. And what we see that recently a new avenue has been come up and becoming more prominent, that is dietary change as a way to reduce demands. For instance, claims are being made that it may reduce 19% of our global arable land, 12% of our global water use. But we also question how realistic it is to assume worldwide dietary changes. That being said, Petra, I'm giving it over to you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Chris. What can I say? I think our call is really a call for more realism, but also a call maybe for new scenarios with more up-to-date underlying assumptions, because some of the assumptions which the comprehensive assessment made did not materialize. So this is really a call maybe to have new scenarios with more up-to-date, based on up-to-date assumptions. And I think the comprehensive assessment has really been influential, because many people thought, yes, we can fix it without and taking this if certain things realize for granted. And it's good to indeed look back and see whether they have materialized. And now we see clear trends that they didn't. So maybe we should have new scenarios again, with better assumptions. And still, even today, many claims are made, like Chris said, on water saving. Whereas economically speaking, there's really limited scope for productivity gains. It's really a linear relationship between biomass and transpiration, so there's not much scope to improve it. So this is also a little bit of plea for improved scenarios, which maybe not only show the implications for 2015, but even be more forward-looking to 2075. And they should definitely take account of these more conservative land and water productivity gains, which we have seen so far, because I think the comprehensive assessment has been too optimistic in that sense, but also the possibilities to reduce the demand, because if we cannot have improvements on the supply side, there is a need to reduce the demand side by either change in diets or change in biofuel production, which is also quite water consuming. But also have a closer look at the possibilities to stabilize instead of maximizing yields, given the increased volatility due to the changing climate. Another option would be to consider a crop diversification to focus also on more climate resilient crops, but also nutrient-rich crops, and also include in these scenarios clear trade-offs between sectors and between regions. And finally, last but definitely not least, the world is rapidly changing. And what we see today is, I think, that countries want to be less dependent on each other. And I think in 2007, global trade was considered differently than it would have been today. Let me make that remark without further clarification. Okay, last slide, Chris. Yeah, we're done.
Yeah,
Claudia.
sorry, I'm
We're running out
listening.
of time.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is a suggestion for further reading, but maybe the slides can be shared. So I'll give it back to Claudia.
Yeah,
here.
maybe just the acknowledgement. I think, Petra, you missed Gerlo Borghuis and Maria Christoforidou. And
Oh, sorry for not mentioning.
yeah, I think they are in the audience today. And also Simon Lange and from IMI and JASA. Yeah, it was really great to work together with all of them on this analysis. So thanks for that.
Okay.
Thanks for
Yeah.
adding.
Thanks so much for this comprehensive presentation of why a lot of the factors of the comprehensive assessment of water use in agriculture did not come through. I think there'll be a lot of questions, and please put these questions in the Q&A so that we can pick them up. I see one question is already there. I myself have asked a lot of questions, but before we move to the audience, we have a few minutes from our discussants. Mohsin Hafiz, who I had introduced at the beginning. He's the strategic program leader at IWMI and also the lead of the WEFE Nexus policy area of work under policy innovations. We use longer and longer titles at CGIAR. So over to you, Mohsin, maybe just really 2-3 minutes of, maybe you can bring some questions or what is the way forward. And I think there's a new commission that might also add yet more questions to this future of water in food, water for food. Yeah, over to you, Mohsin, please.
Thanks, Claudia. Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, I'm really thankful to that one, the Jonas, and as well as Petra and then the Chris for an excellent presentation. When I look around the both of that one, that's giving a excellent contrast. So we are looking about the future and then saying it, there are ways for the national commitment, how we could go on business as usual and then not impacting on the nature. If you go on the national commitment scenarios, and then we are talking about agri-food system and saying it how we could minimize that from the greenhouse gas emission and also not impacting on the forestation, but achieving the food security for the country like Ethiopia. And then there are really good examples that how we could move forward on that one. In 2050, the projection is about the calories, national dietary calories around 2,790. That's really good. But one thing which I miss it in the whole thing is it's really great. It's capturing all the scenarios and everything. It was, although that it's the Jonas talked about that one, the environmental issues about the deforestation, high emission from agriculture, land degradation, and climate variability. But apparently the water, which is one of the connector for the agri-food system, when we are talking it about that one, how the productivity will be enhanced in the irrigated, which we are picking up later on in that the Petra is also that one, the only gain is in the irrigated one. That's the agriculture and how the water is playing, which is not directly captured in the modeling scenario. And I'm aware of that one. FABLE model has some certain limitations on the use of the water as indicated. But then I will come back in a minute about the question which I have it. But now the other thing is Petra and then Chris really presented about what was the things, the assumption in 2007 and how the things need to look like. And there was a certain assumption made that in 2020 or 2050 we'll be achieving those ones, but that has not gained on that one. We have not really achieved on that one. But one of the important thing is which Chris highlighted about that one, that the rain-fed area does not have it increase on that one, what it did, although the area has increased significantly, but yield has not been increased in that area. But while we are looking it around on irrigated agriculture has again that when the productivity or the yield has increased, but then the problem is we are facing the environmental problem or we are facing the nature at the cost of nature. What could be the balance, how that could be trade-off as a part of that one? What's the kind of that one, the balance on that one? We want to grow the agriculture, but and also more production but with less water. And then one of the interesting thing which you mentioned, that's very right, and we are often talking about water saving at the farm scale and saying we have made major gains on water saving. But when we look around that one, the basin scale level, hardly any impact on that one. We are not able to quantify that one, the water saving at the basin scale level. It's just issue of scale and everything. And then lastly is about why we are not, the water productivity in terms of photosynthesis in the efficiency. That's one of the major finding. What are the things, what we need to differently to measure on that one? That will be another interesting question. So now I just want to have it. I have two questions from the one from the Jonas and one from that one, the Petra and Chris. Jonas, from you, could you please explain a bit about in the FABLE model calculator how you've talked about the land degradation, you talked about climate variability. What assumptions, how you're able to come up more on the water, which is one of the main factor when we are talking about the irrigated agriculture, and even for the rain-fed agriculture. If you want to achieve the food security, and if we are not considering the water, what that has the implication, and then how you are able to, how you have captured the water, as is it that part of the climate variability, or where exactly? That's the question to Jonas. And then the question to Chris, and then the Petra is about that one. We know that with Dalma, what you talked about the 7 scenarios for the future, 6 to 7 scenarios for the future. If we want to look around the 2050 to 2075, what exactly this one scenario which we should pick up as a part of that one, and what's the topmost pick of that one? Just lastly about that one, IWMI, along with the Doherty Institute, we are working on the Sustainability Commission on Water for Food Futures, where we are looking at around that one, where we are standing and what will be the future water outlook for food system, for food future in 2040 or beyond, what we could do differently to pick up on that one, what are the successful examples and everything. So I think this seminar, this webinar is very useful, very linkful for that one, what we are doing it, but I want to know about the very quick response on those questions, and then we'll go for that one, for any questions. Back to you, Jonas, and then the Petra.
Yeah,
Thank
great.
you.
So,
Thank you.
good. Yeah, if everyone could be on video now, and then we'll exactly answer these questions and additional questions from the audience. And again, audience, this is your chance to put additional questions in the Q&A. But over to, who started to answer, Chris or Jonas? I didn't see it. Yeah, please over to Chris.
Okay, thanks, Claudia, and thanks, Mohsin, for I think you're asking very excellent questions, and I very much appreciate how you were asking basically the trade-offs between intensifying irrigation, but can we still also conserve the environment? I hope from our presentation it becomes clear there are no easy fixes or optimal fixes anymore. We are really running out of options on the production side. And that means that you have to make choices, or the scenarios, they have to really reflect really clear trade-offs. And I think it is really important in that sense to, from a scope point of view, to include environment and look at agriculture and also look at the other demands. So it's not only about the food futures, but it is about food environment futures, because we can produce enough food for the world. Producing the food is not, maybe I'm exaggerating, but it's not the main problem, right? So that I think is one point. And the second thing, I think you asked about scenarios. What are key takeaways for new scenarios? My 50 cents for that is to be very modest in your land and water productivity gains, and start with that as, let's say, the baseline, and see how the world is going to look if you take that as a starting point. And I hope you are going to get really worried and scared. And from that, you can take as a starting point more maybe drastic scenarios to say, okay, how does the world look differently if we start to look at different diets, if we're going to reduce the biofuel, if we're going to change our dietary patterns, to then see how the world may look like. And and then start at, let's say, a trade-off analysis. But I think it is really important to start with a realistic baseline of, oh, well, we cannot produce anything we want. What has to change?
Okay, before handing over to Jonas, can you maybe also answer the 2 audience questions? And I guess there's getting more, and there's another one for Jonas coming in. So there's a question from Matthew McCartney. He wanted to know, when you did this reanalysis, did you also look at the agrochemical use?
No,
Okay.
we did not, but we only looked at yields. But as Matthew writes, indeed, chemicals may boost the yields a lot. But it is really, I think, worrying to see that, of course, agrochemicals have been applied maximum where they could have been, but still the yields have only been increasing slightly. So I hope that is answering his question.
Okay, and the second question from Faisal Baik is about any warnings, or any conclusions from the comprehensive assessment report, that were more dire, were more negative than they actually turned out.
Maybe not more negative, but I would say the worst case scenario, I think that was very clever. They kept it also in the scenarios to show, yes, we can, but if we don't, this is the worst case. And in that way, I think the comprehensive assessment has been, taking a broad spectrum in their scenarios.
So you're saying we didn't hit the worst case scenario quite yet, or?
I cannot conclude that on the basis of our research, because for that we were lacking the data. But yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay, good. Okay, that's good to know. So over to Jonas, and maybe you were actually starting before already. If you could answer the questions from Mohsin, and then there's still lingering questions on your very aspirational afforestation projections for Ethiopia. Yeah, if you can comment on that too, please.
Thank you, Claudia. So let me start with Mohsin. It's about the issue of water in the FABLE calculator, and then I think Mohsin has just got, a very basic idea of FABLE, how we consider water in the FABLE calculator. Well, the very strong side of FABLE is on the food, land, and GHG, but that doesn't mean that water is totally ignored from the calculator. We consider water as an output, and we measure the total amount of green water that needs to be available for expanding irrigation. So in the FABLE calculator, water is an output, as a projected. So we project in the future as the amount of green water and blue water that needs to be available for expanding irrigation. And also water is also a part of irrigation water requirement in the FABLE calculator. That is an essential scenario input to the FABLE calculator. So we develop scenario about the target of irrigation area expansion developed by the country. So we project that this amount of land will be irrigated by the near future, and then consider that into the amount of food that could be gained from that irrigation area expansion. But in the future, as Mohsin said, that then we are still working on enhancing and refining the water part of the FABLE calculator, and then we can expect just a very smart and a very good output of water in the near future. Mohsin, and thank you for that, Mohsin. And this is about water. So, Claudia, may I proceed to the Q&A parts here about the afforestation targets? Yeah. So, so our afforestation targets are just guided by the national commitments as written in the 10-year development plan of the country and in the low emission development plan of the country. That is set to have a new 24 million hectare of afforestation area by 2050, which is about 0.8 million hectare of new forest area every other year, which we believe is feasible because Ethiopia has enough land to implement that. There is enough land to afforest this amount of land every other year. And this is also, feasible considering the amount of budget allocated for that. And then in the FABLE calculator, we mostly focus on measuring the impact of these targets on the GHG and on the food targets. This is the target already set by the government. So we that much don't comment this is feasible or that's feasible on the government, but we just try to show what it looks like the pathway of Ethiopia, the near future, its food pathway, its GHG pathway, based on these targets, these ambitious plans of the government. And they've said that we promote the government to implement this one because it is the best option both for the food, for the GHG, and for the international commitment of the country. And that is the outlook from our modeling experience. And thank you, Claudia.
Yeah. So thanks so much. I think really already some great additional interactions and insights in addition to your presentations. And I think, as Mosnafis also said, a lot of fodder and food for thought for the Commission of Water for Food Futures. So, and I like, Chris, your statement. You know, it can't just be for food futures. It has to be for food futures and the environment, because otherwise, if we leave the environment out of sight, which is obviously what we have been doing over the last many decades, it will come back to bite us. And I also, liked, everyone's statements and contributions in terms of the role of trade that is, becoming much less of a lower component of the solution space, or a less important component of the solution space, just the way countries are currently focusing more on food self-sufficiency, food sovereignty, and national concerns, putting national concerns ahead of the global good, which actually is probably better for them as well, because otherwise climate change, will come right back to bite if food is not traded and production systems are not following comparative advantage considerations. So yeah, I think also adding this additional thoughts in terms of dietary change as a potential lever for, to improve both food security and environmental outcomes, and actually health outcomes as well. I think it's really good. That is definitely a change that has become much more prominent, has also been included in the IPCC report AR6, where dietary change was for the first time considered a lever that to address both climate change and food security outcomes. So I agree with you. Doing a new assessment, I think is really would be a great next step forward. The Commission of Water for Food Futures, I think, is a great step in the direction, but we will need to do more modeling, more assessments, also more engagement with stakeholders, which is exactly what the FABLE Calculator is very good at. The challenge also, I think that, no one has explicitly said, but is underlying all of this, is a lack of funding in agriculture research, which really underlies why we were not able to intensify rain-fed systems, why we continue seeing very rapid increase in arable area, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa and particularly in West Africa. And of course, there are underlying political and conflict situations that have not supported the case. So I think all in all, for CGIAR policy innovation program, it suggests a further case or a further justification to do more research in water for food and nature futures. And with that, I'd like to thank everyone for really participating in this very insightful, wonderful webinar, looking forward, looking backward. And I invite everyone to follow us. We have additional WEFE Nexus policy webinars coming up until the end of the year. There are a lot of other reports coming out, and we should all take a look to what extent they're serious about nature and water. For example, the EAT Lancet 0.2 or 2.0 version is coming out. COP 30 is coming. Everyone, I think, has the overall interest to improve this very dire outcomes or dire future, but we don't really see a lot of, I think, actual investment and actual changes happening on the ground. So let's hope that this webinar is a contribution to move from simulation, modeling, and aspirations to action. So thanks again to everyone, and goodbye.